Welcome to the Solid Verbal. The Solid Verbal.
Come after me! I'm a man! I'm 40!
I've heard so many players say, well, I want to be happy. You want to be happy for a day? Eat a steak.
It's that woo-woo!
And now, Dan and Ty.
Welcome back to the Solid Verbal, boys and girls. My name is Ty Hildebrand. Joining me, as always, over there, beautiful New York City, Dan Rubenstein. Sir, how are you?
Oh, Ty, I am jumping out of my seat. I am very excited for this show. You already know, because you've already clicked on the episode, that Chris B. Brown from Smart Football and smartfootball.com and the books and everything is on the show. But what I'm most excited about, Ty, and I'm sure you are too, is when we have him on generally, it's like, oh, let's ask him a question about guarding again, defending the spread. Oh, right, let's ask him a question about outside run contain. Oh, let's ask him a question about how, Auburn's offense has, changed from this coordinator to this coordinator. No, Ty. Nope. Today, we are extremely excited because we are going to be very specific, and we want to talk about communication and terminology. Is that correct?
Communication, terminology, language, Dan.
Yeah.
It's all about building a relationship, not just with your players, but with your coaching staff. And how are we going to call the plays? That's the question. How do we call the plays that are going to help the team win?
It's true. And football is no different than any other industry. You have to know how to speak. You have to know how to communicate. You have to know what you're doing and how you're doing it. And the only way to do that is by teaching and telling people what to do in a way that they understand. So I am super curious to learn about how, especially, obviously football has gotten a lot faster in terms of no huddle and tempo and signaling and coaches writing down play cards and what's on those. So there's a whole lot to cover. And I'm very excited to learn about, or learn more at least about, the language of football. If that makes sense.
It is scheme theme. That's why you heard a little bit of a different intro track. Mm-hmm. Scheme Theme Month is presented by our friends over at Oliver's Apparel.
Yes.
We've mentioned it time and time again now, so hopefully you are familiar with the All Over short made by Oliver's Apparel. Mm-hmm. I am wearing mine right now, full disclosure. But we would encourage everyone, go on out to oliversapparel.com.
It's the greatest.
Learn more about what they bring to the table, Dan. It's not just the shorts. They've got versatile clothing that you can wear to your workout, or just if it's like everyday casual stuff. Mm-hmm. Whatever you're in the market for, up your game with the great high-quality stuff that oliversapparel.com has to offer. And for our listeners and our listeners only, they're going to knock 15% off the order today if you use the code SOLID, S-O-L-I-D, at checkout. Again, at Oliver's Apparel, OLIVERSAPPAREL.com. Use the special Scheme Theme Month offer code of SOLID at checkout. You're going to save 15%, Daniel.
It's a good chunk. I've lived most of, if not all of my adult life, not really thinking about what I wear to work out in, what I wear sort of around the house and, around the neighborhood, whatever, that it's just casual wear. It's just got to be light and I got to be able to move in it. And you don't really understand the difference until you actually put on Oliver's super high quality stuff. It is like, you're just like, oh wow, this fits me better. Oh, it breathes better. Oh, I look leaner than I actually am in that. Like, it all adds up when you actually invest in high quality workout and casual gear. It's such a difference maker, Ty. Jody with an I has been complimenting. I don't hate that. I don't hate that. So I am very excited to be on to this next sort of era of my casual and workout wear life, Ty. I am beaming. I am 100% beaming when I wear my Oliver's All Over short.
I was up at Mama H's, actually.
She noticed.
Yeah, she noticed. I was hooking up a sound bar for her television. Mm-hmm. She said, what you got there? I told her about Oliver's Apparel. She was very impressed.
Nice. So, look at you.
Not only wife approved, but mother approved as well.
All right, Ty, with that, we are now joined by Chris B. Brown, a.k.a. Chris B. Brown, a.k.a. Smart Football, a.k.a. The Art of Smart Football. Go to Amazon, a.k.a. What's the name of the other book, Chris?
Essential Smart Football.
The Essential Smart Football.
Yes.
You've seen his work on Grantland, on ESPN, SB Nation, everywhere. So much fun nerding out over X's and O's and scheme talk, and his books, by the way, and I mean this sincerely. There's no better book if you're just like, I want to nerd out, but not like spend 3 weeks. You can breeze through his books. There are visual elements. They're wonderful, and you can get through them in a day or two. So yeah, that's my spiel. Ty, how you doing? How you feeling about this show?
I'm doing well. The other thing that I would add here, if anyone out there is wondering how intense our guest is, when we connected up with him, this is a true story. When we connected up with him a few minutes ago, he was sort of devising how he would conduct this interview, at least on his end, because he wasn't sure if he'd need both hands to go through the signal calls that we're going to ask him about, if the speakerphone would be enough for what we require here on the Verbal. So Chris is taking this very seriously, and we appreciate that, Mr. Brown. How are you?
Good. I mean, hey, if you're going to talk about signaling, you got to get a little like Nick Saban with it and be, gesticulate and do the hands. It's, you got to be, I'm a method actor if we're going to be talking through this.
We appreciate that. So let's start here. Okay. We're talking about communication. You've got a freshman coming into a program. You got a transfer of some kind coming into a program. What is it that you always hear? Something like, he's getting caught up. He's learning the terminology. We kind of have an idea what that means here, just as two sad podcast hosts. But
how dare you?
When you hear that, Chris, what do you hear? What exactly does that mean?
The part of the challenge is it means different things for different teams. So if you are, are you a no huddle team? Are you a huddle team? And then what you obviously have to learn whatever language is being spoken to communicate the plays. And then you have to figure out what are the procedures that are required to actually relay that information to the other players to get people going. So just to take, the simple example, I mean, my high school was like we used the Paul Johnson method when I was in high school, which was you have pretty simple play calls, and they were old school. If you want to run the ISO off tackle to the right, it was 42, right? I mean, literally our play calls were I right, I formation right, 42, ISO right. And then in order to get the play in, we rotated receivers. Was really the Paul Johnson method. You'd have a receiver. I did this for a little while myself. Was a junior, and then when I wasn't good enough to stay on the field the whole game, and then the coach would say, you'd hear the offensive coordinator, head coach go, "What do we call it?" Say, "All right, 42," and then they'd give it to you, run in, and then you're out of breath, and you tell the quarterback, "I write 42," and then he turns around to the huddle and tells everybody, "I write 42," and that still works, right? And that's pretty simple. And if you're a new player coming into that system, you probably in high school or your junior college or wherever, you ran the off tackle play, and you pretty quickly within a couple days could learn to translate whatever you called it at your prior school to I write 42. And then the procedures are pretty simple. You give it in the huddle, and then you line up there and you take the snap and you execute the play. As I said, Paul Johnson, Georgia Tech does that. Believe it or not, the other place that basically does it the same way is the NFL in terms of procedures, because they can use the communication headset, right? So
right, sure.
They're just sitting in the huddle, and they just say, "Hey, go run I write 42," and then they huddle. You can turn around and say I write 42, and then they go and do it. Obviously, the difference in the NFL is that the play calls are much longer. There's more memorization because it's usually broken out into finite parts because they're trying to tell each player what to do. But in terms of procedurally, it's pretty simple. The problem, I would say, for the challenge for a lot of these college teams is that the terminology is more complex than I write 42. You've got to learn a wider variety of formations. You've got to learn a wider variety of plays, tags on them. And then you have to deal with whatever our communication procedures are. Because it's got to get from the coach to the quarterback, then the quarterback has usually some level of responsibility at the line to tell the other players what to do. And then, especially if you're any kind of no huddle team or want to go up tempo at all, you've got to do it quickly or you lose the value of that. So I think that's the challenge for a young quarterback or a transfer quarterback is you've got to learn the language and you got to translate all this stuff and sometimes learn new concepts and how things alter, but you've got to do it in a physical environment where you've got to do it quickly and get it relayed and then interpret someone's doing hand signals at you, you just get up to the ground, you got to find the coach, and then turn around and communicate, or make sure everyone else is, on the same page. So that to me is the challenge. I think that's the underrated part of it, which is it's not just learning plays and learning names. It's learning multiple communication methods, sign language,
right,
code words, and then actually doing it in a physical environment.
So we're going to dive into a lot of what you just mentioned there, but I want to start with the composition of a play call. So 42 might be some sort of running play in high school, in college. You mentioned as you go up through the ranks, it tends to get a little bit more complicated. I think the secret language term that a lot of people, if you've watched Monday Night Football, John Gruden, you're used to hearing spider 2Y banana. What is the composition of the wording of a play call? What other things are signaled throughout just that terminology? And is there any kind of common convention used to help these guys, whether it's players or coaches, get up to speed quicker if they move from program to program or team to team?
Yeah. So there's a couple of structural similarities because there are just things that are inherent in calling a football play, meaning that the first thing you got to tell people is where to line up, right? You got to have a formation. And then the second thing is, are you going to do anything else pre-snap before the formation, like a motion or a shift? And so you can have a whole system of how you call your formations and then certainly your motions and shifts. So for formations, there's, I would say, two schools of thought with this. And actually, I used to be more of the former, but with no huddle, it pushes you towards the latter, which is I actually would prefer a system where you have a handful of base formations, meaning that it tells most people where to line up, like twins right or left, or you can use colors or words. And then you have tags, which then tell certain players where to go, like the H-back or the fullback type player, slot player. And the advantage of that is I could have 4 or 5 formations that tell 10 of my players where to line up, but then if I've got a second call which tells the H-back where to go, and I've got 6 options off of that, now I've increased the number of formations exponentially, and I didn't have to add new words for everybody. The problem in a no-huddle context is two concepts takes 2 signals or 2 words. So you're always trying to fight the urge to make your play call longer. And this is where, and I'm a big fan of simpler, shorter, but remember, simpler, shorter means more memorization. Scott Frost did some clinic stuff recently and talked a lot about that with formations. They basically, if they've added a lot of formations to what they did at UCF and will be doing it at Nebraska compared to even what they did at Oregon, but that requires more memorization of players because they're not willing to have these multiple word formations, which would give you a lot of flexibility. And that's one thing the NFL guys will do because they can give you, one way you can have hundreds of formations is to have 20 formations and then have 8 tags on those formations, and then you can just do the math. It's literally an exponential increase. And then you get into shifts and motions, which are a whole other ball of wax, which is, how many different types of motions, and then how do you designate who's doing what? So that's before the play even starts, right? So then the question is how do you call the play? And that can mean a lot of different things, and there's a lot of different ways to do it. Either you have 11 guys, so you need to tell 11 guys what to do. You can do it as my high school did, or like a lot of teams still do. You have one word or one number that tells all 11 players what to do. Or you can have it where you have different words or codes or signals that tell the different groups what to do. It may actually be the same play, or as we can get into later, package plays and things where and RPOs where it allows you to actually mix and match a little bit. But that's a way to give yourself more flexibility. And as we'll see with some of the tempo teams, it actually can make you faster because you can have different people communicating with different players at the same time to make you go a little faster while having more variability. So if you just break it down, usually the offensive line needs at least one call. What are they blocking? And then the receivers need some kind of are they blocking? Are they running a pass route? Are they running a screen? Whatever it is. And then sometimes it's common to have a base play, and then you've got a tag on that play. And then the last thing that's often overlooked is many plays need a directional call, just right or left. And so there's different ways to do that. But when you have to factor that in too. So you add that up. Even if you're a no huddle up-tempo team, you can wind up with 6 or 7 different things that you've got to signal or call in. And there's ways to divide and conquer on all that, but 6 or 7 different pieces that you've got to communicate to get everyone lined up. Are they motioning, shifting, and then run whatever the play call is? And then the quarterback has to mentally be able to build a picture of that in his mind so that he knows what he's supposed to do.
So we know about coaching trees, and I guess let's use the example of Scott Frost now that he's been at Oregon, I guess Northern Iowa before that, but UCF now at Nebraska. Is there are there different, as you mentioned, theories of communication that would travel along those same, I guess, coaching branches? If Chip Kelly put on a headset listening to a Nebraska call, would he sort of get the sense of what they're trying to do because of his own experience? Obviously putting in his system that Scott Frost learned from at Oregon. Are there sort of languages or I guess dialects within coaching trees that sort of spread through the sport?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. But I actually think college probably less so. And I think that's where you get into the NFL, where players move around a lot, and sometimes they'll get picked up off the street and they've got to drop them in. And there's definitely differences. The Patriots are a little different than the West Coast type team and some of these other teams, but there's a lot of carryover in how NFL players, they communicate, and then there's some translation, but how they communicate. Your buddy Jeff Schwartz, who's awesome, is amazing, and he knows so much football, but he will get like in an argument like all day with like a fan about like what a concept is called. And he's absolutely right that that's what it's called in like the NFL. But I know high schools that will just call it whatever they want because usually there's some up-tempo team and they don't want the defense to know what it is, and then B, some 15-year-old has no idea that the weak side counterplay is typically called stutter, which is sort of a weird anachronistic term. But if you ask almost any NFL offensive lineman, they'll say, oh, the weak side counter is called stutter. And so there are dialects and things that are carryover, but and maybe this will change with the grad transfer rules and all that, but colleges I do find are a little more provincial. One dialect that I think is easy to start with because it's so simple and it can kind of give you some flavors if you want. I can basically tell you exactly how the old school air raid guys will communicate from start to finish, from when a play comes into Mike Leach's brain to how he gets it to all the players. I don't know if that's useful to do because I think they have a really simple system that arguably people think they could steal all the signals, which is a different problem. But it's a good introduction to like how all these work. And then all these air raid guys, they've now evolved, but they all started basically with the same procedural mechanics.
What is that root? What is that root system?
So the two things to know is that they have a really simple structure where they have formations. Most of them have one word because they don't run a lot of formations. And then most of their plays they've got numbers. They have a system where almost all their pass plays are numbered, but the numbers really don't mean anything. They vaguely mean something, but they're kind of, it's weird. Like, their 5-step drop back passes are 90 plays, like 91, 92, 93, 94, 95. And then, but for some reason, their 3-step quick game, it's like 62 or 619 or 617 or 8. It like doesn't make sense. But the point being, the players learn it, and then they only run so many plays, so it's easy enough to learn. So they have pretty simple building blocks. So the first thing, you can watch a Washington State game, and I've been told that Leach, I won't tell you what all the signals are because I'll get in trouble, but I've been told that Leach's signals basically haven't changed since like 2003 at Texas Tech. But if you watch him, they'll call formations. And so the two formations they probably run the most. And if you watch a lot of other air raid guys, they still use the same signals for formations. It's ace, which is their 2x2 4 wides, which is you point your finger up in the air, or early, which is trips right, which you literally just rub like your eyes, like you're getting up early, or then late, which is like tapping your wrist, which is trips left. So early has an R in it, so trips right, and then late trips left. Really simple stuff. And then each play just has a one hand signal to it. So, and one of the nice things about studying to get introduced, like you watch Leach, he's the one signaling it. It's not one of these teams with 5 signalers on the sideline. And so, what he'll do if he wants to call just one play, one play, which is the one I'll give you, which is simple. I think everyone knows it, which is they run their snag concept, sort of the triangle read. The slot receiver runs a corner, back runs the flat, and then the outside receiver runs like a quick slant or a little sit down route. It's 8, and so he just taps his shoulder, and so he can just call that, and then that goes into the quarterback, and everything runs to the quarterback. Or the thing Leach likes to do is he'll do think about. And so you'll see him call formation ace, then he'll tap the side of his head, which means think about, and he'll give them a couple plays. So then he can just signal 2 different plays. So it could be like ace, and then like 95 being their Y cross play, which everybody knows. And then the quarterback, the nice thing about that system is the quarterback can either call one of those plays or any other play he wants. But then at that point, it's into the quarterback. So if you watched last year, like Luke Falk, this is where Leach has his signals, right? And then all those area guys, they kind of have their signals. But then at that point, it becomes the players. So they figure out how do they want to communicate. And so and this is true for most tempo teams, though this is changing, and we can get into Scott Frost, how he does a little differently. But most tempo teams, the quarterback then relays the concept to the offensive line through a code word. And so, you can guess why. It's a little harder for the offensive line to turn and look at a signaler on the sideline, or certainly they can't turn and look at a signal from the quarterback. So you give them a code word. Well, you can't just call 42, right? And so you have to have a word that you can call, and you can even call the same thing over and over again, especially with protection schemes where you might change the pass play, but the protection scheme will stay the same. And so you use word association. Every high school to college to NFL team does it. So it could be words that start with B, Budweiser, Bronco, whatever it is, and they all mean the same thing. Or a really common one, I'll give you one old one from Gus Malzahn, which I'm sure he's changed, so I won't get in trouble, which is their counter play, like the counter blocking play for a long time is called Colt, was one word, but then you could call it Indy or Luck for Andrew Luck, because he's quarterback of the Colts. Really simple stuff, not exactly brain surgery, but if you're the defense and you've got 2 seconds, you don't necessarily know that there's Luck and Colt are necessarily the same thing. You might get used to it over time. They change their calls, and then the quarterback in the air raid system will then signal everything to the receivers, which he has his own signal. The receivers and the quarterback just make up their own signals year to year, and so that's where they can kind of take ownership of that stuff. And then the nice thing about that system, since everyone's looking at the quarterback, if he wants to audible, he can make a call. Usually it's like easy, and then he just sort of re-signals everything. And then that's it. And then they get up and go. And then the other advantage of that is you can call like a run play at the line, and then you could call either a pass route or a screen to the receivers, and it's just done by signal. So that's that system, which is really simple, and that's been the framework for a lot of those guys. The problem with it is, as you can guess, is that if you want to go really, really fast, it's actually kind of slow. Coach to quarterback, quarterback to line, quarterback to receivers. So probably, most tempo teams now, if you watch them, it's coach to quarterback, quarterback to line, coaches, signalers to receivers at the same time. And then you're able to do that simultaneously, so you take out that extra step so that you shave a few seconds off and you can go a little faster. And then the last thing I'll say is I think Frost has moved to, using an example, he's moved to actually having an entirely different signaler for the offensive line. So they're not even getting that extra step from the quarterback. So it's going skill and offensive line, 2 different signalers. And I don't know if they actually have just like extra guys on the sidelines, so they have like live and dead signalers or not. But if you've got multiple signalers, you're able to do it more quickly. So those are some of the key sort of frameworks, but you can mix and match that stuff.
Dan, I just wanted to take a quick break to remind folks about our good friends at Proper Cloth.
Oh, man. So good.
Proper Cloth. They've been our friends for quite some time. You've heard a lot about Proper Cloth, and that's because we believe in what they are doing. You know how difficult it can be to find a dress shirt that fits. Sometimes it can be nearly impossible because something's off, the collar, the sleeves. It's never custom fit the way you want it. And now you can get that from our good friends over at Proper Cloth. ProperCloth.com is where you go to easily create a custom fit shirt size in mere seconds by answering 10 simple questions. You can choose from a bunch of collar styles and cuff styles and fabric styles. Whatever your style is, you can get it exactly to spec. Again, totally custom fit, made for you. They work with the best fabric producers from around the globe. They only buy the highest quality fabrics that meet their expectations. Everything goes through quality control testing. You don't have to worry, am I going to get what I want? Am I not going to get what I want? If one does slip through the cracks and it doesn't fit just right, they will remake it for free. So you have no reason not to try this out, Dan. It truly is the future of shirts. And because everything is made custom for you, it's one of the best shirts you're ever going to wear. You have one. I have one. We're very excited to talk about Proper Cloth. Everything starts at just $80. Stop wearing shirts that don't fit. Start looking your best with a custom fitted shirt at propercloth.com/solid today. Enter the gift code SOLID and you will save $20 off your very first shirt.
Obviously, tempo is a relatively modern concept, especially with what it now means and teams going pretty quickly. Who would you say has done the best job or has been the most influential in terms of taking the concept of tempo and no huddle and turning it into something that's super easily digested? I mean, you mentioned Scott Frost. You mentioned Gus Malzahn. Obviously, Chad Morris did a lot at Clemson with no huddle stuff. Who has sort of put the biggest stamp on tempo communication in the last, 12 years or so?
Yeah, it's hard to say because you got to remember teams have different goals when they want to what they want to do. So, and there's a big difference between being a tempo team sometimes and being a tempo team all the time, and that has significant implications on how you build your communication system. So, simple example: the New England Patriots, especially if you go back a few years, really good tempo team. Actually, they can turn on a switch and run tempo, and they literally started doing, and it goes back, Bill O'Brien's talked about this a bunch, in 2011 and 2012, they sort of stole the idea from Oregon where they would just have 6 or 8 calls in the game plan for that week, which were one-word calls. And again, we literally did that at my high school too. It was like orange was like a 2-minute call. We're not like brain surgery here. And you just call orange or, whatever the term is, Patriot or something, and you can go fast, and then everyone knows what to do, and that includes the formation. Allows you to go really fast. And then the rest of the time, the Patriots can signal, they can huddle, they can do all those different things. And the idea is that you take a piece of your game plan and you supercharge it. Again, to use Frost, as he talked about, that they really started doing that at Oregon, and where it really clicked was in 2010. And the game that Frost will mention is when they played Tennessee. I'm sure, Dan, you well remember when they played Tennessee, and they didn't really play well early, but they really wore them down and then blew them out in the second half. And that was one of the first games where they did that concept, and they had like 7 plays so they could do that fast. And in the second half, they were just doing those over and over and over again. The flip side of that is that if you're a team like Malzahn's team, everything you do is no huddle or built to be no huddle. So when you're teaching on day one, you're not teaching 42 and then translating it to here's the no huddle version of that in, later in the system. You're teaching it as this is what we do. Everything is being signaled. You actually will learn the plays in a no huddle context, and then you're ready to receive the information that way. And that's how the plays are taught, which significantly impacts how you set up your offense, because one of the downsides of being a no-huddle up-tempo team all the time is, and this is one reason why the NFL is not, you don't see any teams go 100%, because it's very difficult to tweak and make in-game adjustments when you've drilled down your play as to just Patriot or whatever, because then now the defense has shifted and you want to run it, but you want to do it a little differently or add a tag. You can't. You run Patriot again. And then the only way you could also do it is you get on the sideline and say, next time we call Patriot, we're going to do this. So which not to say that Gus and his system, they don't have answers to that, but they have to build it within a no huddle framework, because they can't just go huddle and then easily call a couple extra tags. I think Chip Kelly was a big influence. I think the air raid guys, because there's so many of them, and they've been going no huddle since like the 90s, so they've gotten pretty good at it. There's a bunch of schools of thought. Certainly all the teams that started doing the freeze call, where you call a formation, you fake the snap, and then everyone looks at the sideline. I mean, there was a time when every team did that, so whoever was the first to do that was obviously influential. But I think there's just a lot of different ways to skin the cat.
The other thing that comes to mind, Chris, because I'm guessing there are people at home listening to this who are blown away by the complexity of it all, but we all know those rushed moments in a game where it's very apparent that 2 plays have been called in the huddle. How is it possible within the framework of all this to do that if maybe you don't have a play that's only one word? How do you communicate multiple plays at the same time in a situation where perhaps you're running a 2-minute offense?
Well, I think that's the key. You probably wouldn't do it much in a 2-minute offense setting. I sort of break it in a couple categories. So one I already touched on, which is the maybe most unique, but I do think one of the more interesting ones, which is the Mike Leach, where he does think about and he just sort of gives a couple suggestions, then the quarterback just calls one. Right. There's the Peyton Manning version, which is where you actually huddle, and then you lay out, like you spill out a whole long thing, and then you get to the line, and then you call kill, 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 or whatever your term is, which basically means run the second play or the third play or whatever, and then everyone in the huddle heard what are the options. And then most no huddle teams don't really call, look, college no huddle teams, which is they don't call multiple plays of the line because it's sort of defeats the purpose of being no huddle. It requires another call. So typically what they'll do is they'll either do the freeze call, which I said before, which is you don't call a play, you get lined up, you fake the snap, and then everybody's, you see what the defense does, and everybody looks at the sideline, and then you call the play. The other thing to remember is that one of the constraints of these no huddle teams, and this was one of the problems that Chip Kelly had in the NFL, is he had no audible mechanic, which is sort of hard to believe for an NFL team, but by going fast and having multiple signalers for multiple positions, you didn't have that central person who could then, some Peyton Manning or Tom Brady, who could then say, just change the play. And that was a constraint. Now, what they had was that, one, they'd go no huddle and they could get the defense lined up. And then two, this is where RPOs have come in and package plays and all that stuff, is the idea that you build or just read options. You build the answers into a single play. And now you don't have to check to a pass or check to a run. It's built into the play call. And then therefore and really one of the reasons RPOs I think exploded is because it fit well within the up-tempo no huddle framework, because you could call one play and then the quarterback, without communicating anything, could throw it or hand it off or read it or whatever. So I think there's less of, unless you see a team huddle, and I'm not saying no one ever does this, but unless you see a team huddle, you're not calling multiple plays that much. The caveat I'll give to that is that you got to remember the secret weapon for a lot of coaches is the wristband. And so there's a lot of stuff on that wristband and you can use them different ways. You can give them to the quarterback, or you'll see a lot of teams, they give them to everybody. And so that allows a little, it's slow because you just have to call something out, and usually it's just a list of plays that are numbered. So someone can either signal, or a quarterback could announce 25, and everybody looks at their wristband and sees 25.
Are there any kind of like situational guidelines on those wristbands? How detailed or complex do they get?
It sort of totally depends on who you are and what your team is and what purpose you're using them for. So one example is, and Peter King wrote like an MMQB piece right after the Super Bowl, Nick Foles wore a wristband in the Super Bowl, and the sort of the final touchdowns, I don't know if it was go ahead, I can't remember, for the final touchdown, the slant pass to Zach Ertz, where they ran bunch to the right and then put the back and bullet motion and went to four receivers on one side and threw a slant backside. The play call to Nick Foles on his headset was wristband 145. and he looked at his wristband, and then I think he huddled, but it was just on the wristband. And that the reason they did that is just a more efficient way to make sure the whole play call got in. And I have to pull it up, but the the play call was something like whatever protection, and it was like X slant Z follow or something like that. So they had the whole play call, which he communicated to the players, but in that context, it was just a more efficient way to get the concept to the Foles. The other thing you'll see tempo teams do, and you see it a lot at the high school level, they'll give everybody wristbands so that the coaches, when they're doing these signals, they don't have to have, as we talked about with like the air raid system, they have to have a signal for every play. But one of the problems is if you want to change your plays or have different concepts, or you've got tags, so meaning that you have 3 or 4 words to call the play, so you don't have to make 3 or 4 signals. You could just signal everybody 22, and then the whole team looks at their wristband, and then they know what to do. To flip to the other side of the ball, good example of this is Gary Patterson at TCU, who has to deal with a lot of up-tempo teams in the Big 12. He's got a very crisp and well thought out system for calling his defenses, and I don't just mean calling the coverage, but there's so what Gary Patterson does on defense is he calls different coverages to different sides of the field. He often calls a trips check, meaning that we'll do this each side of the field, but then if they line up in trips, we'll call this other coverage. And then he's got what he wants the front to line up in, meaning where do the defensive line and the linebackers line up. And then he'll have stunts and blitzes, and he can put them in combination so that guys can do different things, which is a great system, but as you can imagine, it can get wordy. And so when you're going against Oklahoma or Texas Tech or whoever's going fast, you got to communicate it quickly. And Gary Patterson is well known. He started having all of his defensive players wear wristbands, and so which is a great system. But there was a great moment on the coaches show, the coaches film room this year for the Rose Bowl, when Gary Patterson was there, and then Dana Holgerson was there, and Major Applewhite, who used to be in the Big 12, and I think he was at Texas and a couple of places. And they were talking about a play I mentioned earlier from Air Raid System 95, the Y cross, because Oklahoma ran it a few times, and all those Air Raid guys know it, and Gary Patterson's offensive coordinators were Air Raid guys. But and they were joking about, we know the signal for 95 and had to change the signal. And then I think it was Major Applewhite, but it could have been Holgerson, turned to Patterson and said, do your players all still look at their wristbands whenever you call a blitz? And Patterson's face like dropped, and everyone, and like you had like Bielema and those guys like burst out laughing. And it was funny because Patterson's blitzes are wordier than his base calls. So they had picked up on a little tell, which is, he said it was like Big 12 knowledge. It was like, yeah, you tell your players if they look at the wristband, they're bringing a blitz. That's a good coaching point you give them during the week.
Well, you enter into territory that we had planned to ask about, and hopefully it's not too seedy, but of course everyone knows about Spygate and what went on in the NFL. And look, it goes on at all levels of competitive sports. I don't care if it's baseball or basketball or football. There is always some kind of operation to break another team's signals. How complex is that operation on the college level? How difficult is it to actually pick off a tell, kind of like you've described with Gary Patterson?
Yeah, I'd say it's not actually that hard to pick up. How complex it is a good question, and I don't know. I couldn't tell you if you took SEC program X, which has a lot of they all have a lot of resources and people. Do they have people who are just basically trying to crack the code all the time? Probably. I'm not sure exactly what kind of operation they have. I can tell you from the other side, there's a couple different schools of thought on it. One is, and I probably lean more to this, is that if the other team is spending that much time trying to crack your signals, then then trying to actually figure out what that means, communicate it, and then make it actionable for the defense in a way that they could actually do something about it, especially in a world where players can check plays and you have RPOs that can be different types of plays. It probably does them more harm than good. I was talking to a high school coach recently who talked about that, the opponent, at halftime, he could tell these guys were stealing their signals, but they were killing them. And so they they did a couple things where they kind of faked the signal and then ran like a fake and go or something. But then also they just kept doing it. Then after the game, they won by like 40 points. The other guy was like, I was all over your signals. And the guy was like, okay, very helpful. And actually it could work against you because you're, especially if you're facing an up-tempo team where you're trying to tell your players, watch for this or that, and they're not running their keys. It could work against you. I will say that means if you're not an up-tempo team, it may not make a lot of sense to be standing there doing your signals to where the other team can pick them up, because then it maybe becomes a little more actionable. The other thing you think about at the college level is, and I've talked to head coaches about this, and they'd say that one of the bad parts if you're the signaler and you're a head coach is the TV camera's always on you. And so I know for a fact that staffs will line up the TV broadcasts with the all-22 film. I know they do it in the off season, and I'm sure some of them do it during the season to see if they can pick up signals that way and line them up and figure that out. So it happens. It's a question of how actionable it is, and is it a problem, and then how do you respond? Because the answer if you're going to keep them from cracking the code is to make your system more complex. But probably the biggest thing is just to be intelligent about it. One of the two other things I'll mention is one is that I've talked to a bunch of coaches about this. One of the hardest things if you're going to signal or do any kind of up tempo is how do you indicate direction? It's a thing no one thinks about. But if you've got to play power or counter or even your pass protection scheme, right or left can often be it's sort of like cracking these World War II codes. Like if you can find the common link, then you can use that to crack the rest of the code. And it's very often the thing that can be a giveaway, and you have to do it one way or the other. If you use code words, you see a lot of teams try to come up with. There are two ways to do it. One, you just have a bunch of different ways to say right or left, and then sometimes if you take Auburn, for example, they could say right or left. They could say red, white. They could say colors, different things. Alabama, I know for the last few years, they may change it for next year. For a lot of their run plays, they use north and south a lot. That's a code word for right or left. So if they've got a run play, they can say it and they say north or south, that means right or left. The other way to do it is to actually combine the substance of the play with the directional term. And so a term you'll see in like every single playbook, but it has different meanings, is you see a lot of like righty lefty, ram lion, rip Liz for some reason is this football term that shows up in every playbook because it's just a single syllable that means right or left. You can also do it with, I think Alabama for their protection schemes, they have Jack Jill is one. So Jack being right, Jill being left for a 6-man half slide protection. So you do it that way. And then you can also do things. The other one you see a lot of teams put their Z receiver on the right and their X on the left. So you can use X and Z words. So Exxon and zebra, stuff like that, to combine them. So you can do it. So the point being, if you've got a robust system that uses multiple signalers, a few different ways to signal, you can do some code words or you can do signals, and then it's not easy to tell. At some point, it's diminishing returns for the other side to try to spend a lot of time on this stuff and then really make it actionable as long as you change it somewhat regularly. The challenge is always going to be your in-conference, your division opponents, the people you play multiple times a year, because those are the people who are going to pick up on it. The last anecdote I'll give is a couple years ago, there's a famous sort of tete-a-tete about this. Baker Mayfield, of course, had many people he wasn't very happy with, especially coming out of his recruiting process and his transfer process. So a story a few years ago, when the year he sat out at Oklahoma, his quarterback coach at Texas Tech when he was a freshman was Sonny Cumbie, who went and then after that left and became a co-offensive coordinator at TCU. And then, of course, Baker was at Oklahoma. And there's a story that Gary Patterson, after the game, said that Baker Mayfield was standing on the sideline next to, I don't know if it was Stoops or some other defensive coach, watching Sonny Cumbie to steal their signals and then telling them their signals during that whole game. And I think Baker basically was like, yeah, I knew their signals. They were using the same ones at Texas Tech. I just, what I could do. I think they all made the point. Didn't make that big of a difference because there was only so much they could do. But it is something you just have to be intelligent about it. You have to have a backup plan. You have to, I've talked to high school coaches where they're like, I was in the second quarter and it was clear the other team knew our signals. And so we had to do something. And often the other thing to remember you can use it to your advantage. Saw Peyton Manning give a talk not that long ago, and actually I asked him about this because I remember a play. It was like the year he broke like the touchdown record, and the first game they hit like a receiver screen a couple times. I can't remember the code word, but he would often audible to receiver screens at the line when he's got a favorable look. And then he used a code word. And then in like the third or fourth quarter, he used the same word. And then they ran the fake pump and go screen and it went for a touchdown. And I asked him, and he didn't come out and say it, but he confirmed that that was an adjustment they made, that they thought the other team, as the Ravens, were trying to steal the code word, that was the receiver screen. So then they just said, I mean, talk about a great fake. Not only do you pump and you fake the play, but pre-snap you make the same, whatever it was, like rocket screen or something. You say rocket, and then everyone's the fake screen. That's really how you fake them out, because they actually they think they've caught on to your tell. So you can use it. You can always break the tendency and use it offensively to your advantage, even if you think the other side's stealing your signals.
Picture boards on the sideline. Are they a thing? Are they not a thing? Are they sort of a thing?
They are definitely a sort of a thing. They're actually a surprisingly controversial topic in the coaching world. In that I'm always surprised, even up tempo people are like, oh, those stupid coaching boards or picture boards. Like, I hate those things. I think the thing to remember about them is that unless you have like 60 boards in your sidelines, they can only convey so much information because you're going to run a lot of different plays. So there's a lot of coaches who will tell you that they'll use them and they literally are just dummies. They just hold them up, and then it just is a distraction from someone actually stealing their real signals. And there's some merit to that. I think most teams that use them for some limited purpose. And then it's also a way for everyone to have fun with it. I think the most common way to use them, and there's a couple SEC schools that I know will do it this way. They have a couple different signalers, and then which board or which side of the board you hold up basically tells the players which signaler to look at and which one's live. And then that's a way to just create some confusion around so the signals can't get stolen. And that's something you can change quarter by quarter, or each half of what side of what board is right, and it can take a while for the defense and the coaches to figure that out. And then there's other things you could use that, as I talked about the directional, the right or left, it can solve that problem. If you hold up, whatever side of it, that can mean right, and the other side can mean left. And then you can get even more complex with, if you hold it up and then a certain signaler is doing this, that means you're running this type of play, and then other ones you're getting code words. So, some of I use Malzahn's example because I don't really worry about anyone stealing his stuff, because he has probably the most complex system that I understand parts of it, but I certainly don't understand all of it, and I'm sure he changes it a lot, where it involves the boards, it involves signalers, it involves code words, it involves communication, and then different things will mean different things will mean different things depending on what kind of play call. He uses a lot about series, like this will be live on pass plays, this on run plays, this on specials, that kind of thing. So, but the picture boards in his system typically will tell you which signaler to look at, or it can be a directional term.
We've talked to a couple coaches and players who all actually sort of said the same thing about coaches consulting players when it comes to favorite plays, installation, and saying, oh, on 3rd and 7+, what types of plays do you like between the 20s or something like that? And across the board, everybody says coaches will consult players because they want them to run what they're most comfortable with. Does that sort of carry over to communication methods, coaches sort of taking into account how players are best used as communicators, that like sometimes they'll experiment with, maybe this quarterback is better with like longer verbiage, maybe this quarterback is better with shorter verbiage and conveying and communicating. Ultimately, these quarterbacks have to be able to either quickly or coherently tell everybody or tell some people the play. Do communication methods vary based on player or quarterback preferences?
I'm not sure if methods do. I think that ends up being like a team function, and so that a lot goes into it. There's obviously other players. There's what kind of tempo they want to do, what just seems most efficient, and I think it's also hard to do that sort of in season. Those are typically, season to season judgments. And it's often a reaction to, can we get faster? Can we get slower? Do we need to add more offense to have a wider variety of things? Like maybe we were really fast, but we weren't very flexible. But I do think in terms of what the signals are and what the code words are, almost every coach you talk to will tell you the more you can make the players involved in that, the better, because for no other reason, they will remember whatever it is more. If you or I come out there and be like, we're going to run power, we're going to run inside zone, we're going to run this pass play, and here are the signals and here's the code words, that people might retain some of that, but it's going to take more time. But if you say, you make them take ownership of what the signals are, they're going to remember it because they came up with it on their own and they'll talk about it. You also get the benefit of them talking about it when they're not at practice and in the meeting, actually talking football. So you get a lot of benefits of that. I think a lot of that stuff gets worked out in the spring or the summer even. And again, the more organic you can make it and the more ownership the players have, the better. And that's where, language is dynamic, right? I mean, this is sort of, our language, English language, all this stuff, they evolve, they're dynamic, all that David Foster Wallace stuff and linguistics. So, it often takes a life of its own. I mean, you have, again, I use like Malzahn's got a very formal, rigid, here's this and that, but one of the reasons those air raid guys do a pretty good job of it, and it actually survives even though it's pretty simple, is it ends up being more like how people communicate, and that they kind of figure it out, and then they're able to do really subtle moves that even though you think you could pick up on it, it's, you just miss it. And so it becomes a little more of an organic, and it's, it really is, it's just learning another language. I think Seth Luttrell was on your show talking about that. It's just like learning a language. I mean, it's learning another language, learning sign language. I mean, that's all it is.
Fair enough. And I'm sure you saw I think it was called The Two Bills, Bill Parcells and Bill Belichick. And one of the sort of anecdotes was Bill Parcells killing Bill Belichick calls. The call would come in, and as traditionally, a head coach would hear the call and either not say anything or tweak it or whatever, or say, no, we're not doing that, whatever, we're doing this. When now we are in an up-tempo age where a head coach killing a call or adjusting a call takes seconds, takes time, going back and forth with the coordinator, is that dynamic still around where coaches will go and back and forth with the coordinator to get the call that they want, or are coordinators now more empowered to just sort of go without having to worry about a play call getting killed?
I think there's just not enough time if you are a go up tempo team to do it between plays. At most it's like one word, like no, yes, run, and then maybe you can blurt out something. I think what it does is that it's one reason why you see a lot of these up tempo play callers or head coaches, because they're not delegating that stuff; they're doing it themselves. And so the second is that there's a lot of in between series communication. So there's a lot of between series saying that worked, that didn't work. This next series, what are your top? You get your couple guys, especially the guy in the box. There's a lot of these play callers, signalers on the sidelines. So there's that kind of communication is, what are the top three things that you see? What are they doing to this? And then what can we call? And then you kind of work out a plan, and then you try to get the drive started. And then that's also where you've got to have an organized play call sheet, because the sort of going back to the old Bill Walsh stuff, the goal is to get to the point where all this stuff has been thought through during the week. And so you should be able to, you've coached them enough, they've seen the situations, you've got flexible enough calls with RPOs and whatever it is that you can, on many situations, you just look down at your sheet and call the next play on the sheet for that situation. And that should be as simple as it is. And if you're not having a terrible day, that should be how it works. Not to say it works all the way in practices. They come out with a different defense. You can't block a guy. You have an injury. There's different things that certainly can supersede that, but that it puts a lot of pressure actually on your call sheet, because the best no huddle play callers are people who aren't really doing a lot of I just came up with this brilliant call in the moment. They're just looking at the call sheet and calling the next call.
So that was my sort of follow-up, is just sort of tiny and an extension of that, is situationally, how much is on that call sheet, how much is sort of situationally determined ahead of time. Is it, every third down situation, distance and place of field, is every 30-second offense, 2-minute offense, goal line, red zone. Like, how intricate is it situationally predetermined?
Totally depends on the play caller. I mean, we use Mike Leach as an example. I mean, he's got like 5 categories on his call sheet. He's got openers, which is like 20 plays. He's got third and long, third and short, coming out, going in, and specials and screens, and that's like it, like, right? So, and then you've got the NFL type guys where they have, very broken out. One thing you see a lot of no huddle guys is that they'll do it by hash mark. If you're on the left hash, the right hash, middle of the field, which I think is a clever thing because you end up using the leverage of the field a little better. And then you also can break it out into what part of the field you are, and you backed up, are you in the middle, are you in sort of the outer red zone, the green zone, all those different things. And so, and it's just broken down. I mean, the other thing you remember is that you do it proportionally based on how many of those situations you have in a game. So most teams go into the game, for 2-point plays. It's 1, maybe 2, and then often they don't call them, and they go 4 weeks and they have the same one on that situation for 2-point plays. The good teams only have so many third and long calls because there's so many third and longs you actually really encounter in a game. You have a lot of first and second down calls, third and short, second and short, those sort of things. You just have a couple. So it actually works out if you do it. You organize it. You don't have. It's not like 10, 10, 10, 10, 10 for every situation. It's proportional, so your total is not overwhelming. And then it's just the feel of the play caller. Do they feel like they need more categories? Is that helpful? I saw something. Kyle Shanahan's call sheet has like very intricate. He's got like every situation broken out and different things. And that allows him to go to the situation more quickly because he's got some complicated calls he's trying to get to. Whereas, again, you use like a Mike Leach. It's like just call the next thing.
Chris, we're going to get you out of here with 2 quick ones. My first, and it's sort of a question we've been asking all of our guests here during Scheme Theme, but we talk a lot about emerging trends, about evolutions of be it a scheme or some other element of the game. Is there any innovation afoot as it relates to communication? We talked earlier about technology and the impact perhaps that it is having on the way that plays are called. Is there anything else that you find particularly interesting about the means that teams are using to communicate their plays?
Yeah, I guess a couple things, but I think the biggest drivers is technology and rules. So it's just a different world in the NFL where you've got the helmet radio, so you can communicate. And I think one of the interesting trends you saw, actually Chip Kelly was doing this a lot with the tempo stuff, but the guy who probably did it better, Sean McVay there with the Rams, is that in the NFL films to pick this up, they get the play call early and try to get lined up quickly so the radio's still running, and so they can basically have an ongoing dialogue with the quarterback about what they see, and then even audible and things with the you still keep coaching them all the way up to that moment by getting lined up more quickly, which is a big advantage over getting lined up with 4 seconds left and you just have to call the play. I think, you can't do that in college, obviously. I think one thing you're seeing is that I think more teams are moving to almost a pure signaling system because I think the fear is that the code words are a little bit easier to crack. And then obviously you can then run up in a very loud stadium and it's hard to communicate and things like that. And then obviously signaling to the line and everyone can be a little more efficient. The downside of that I think you wouldn't think about is it depends on who your signaler is to the offensive line. It's because you have to practice all this stuff, and if you're doing it right, you should be calling plays in practice the same way you would in the games. And if your offensive line coach or assistant offensive line coach is signaling to the offensive line, they can't stand in practice where they would normally stand, which is behind the offensive line. So that's one reason why you'll actually get a lot of offensive line coaches will resist that, and they like the quarterback giving the code word, but I do think teams are increasingly going to signals because I think the thought is that the signals are a little harder to crack. But I think the only other thing is that tension of how fast can we go versus how much flexibility and how much complexity can we add in, because the days of just running 15 plays out of 4 formations really fast and having the defense off kilter is quickly going by the wayside. Defenses are too good. They're able to react. They can call complex stuff on defense and sort of shut you down. So how can we efficiently do that? That's why I mentioned, Scott Frost, because I think he's taken the Chip Kelly system and has added a wider variety of run schemes, more formations, more things like that. I used, not only they were juggernaut this year, but Jeff Brom there at Purdue, but especially when he was at Western Kentucky, he took kind of the pro style system they learned in the NFL and from Petrino, and he took the whole system, but he made it 100%. You could run the whole offense from no huddle, which I think has interesting implications. If you could run a true pro style system, but where everything is signals, is in a sense, I should say exciting, because it gives you a lot more flexibility to do a wider variety of things. You could still audible, the things that when an up-tempo offense is rolling, it looks great, but then when it gets shut down, again, use Chip Kelly's example, you can't audible, you can't, adjust to the defense. You can get bogged down. So I think that's really where it is that can you come up with simple, easy to learn things that actually give you enough flexibility so that when Alabama and Nick Saban show up with 1,000 defenses, that you're not just stuck running like 14 plays, because all of a sudden you go from looking like you're the greatest offense in the world to like you no longer have the answers.
All right, Chris, we're going to get you out of here with perhaps the hardest question yet. What is the longest play that you can both remember and recite on the podcast today?
Oh man, I can't. I'm not doing this. I'm sorry. I can look them up and all that. I mean, it's just sort of. I try to block that stuff from my mind. I mean, I'm not trying to do the Kyle Shanahan, John Gruden thing. Like I write 42 blast 7 Z jet. I feel like when people do that, they often throw in a couple of those, as you brought up, Ty.
just for the hell of it?
Kill, like the extra play. So they it makes it sound like really long, but really they've called like 4 plays, and then now we have like 7 unnecessary shifts. So if you really want, I can try to dig something out. I mean, we can make it as long as we want. But I mean, and I think that's the interesting tension, right? Is do we literally need a play where we tell a formation where we have 5 ways to tell everyone where to line up? There's just 11 guys. And then do we need to tell all 11 players individually what to do? Or can we try to break it down in a way that's coherent, but then we're not stuck calling 42 blast over and over again? So, if someone else has a better answer than me, that's fine. I'm happy to give up that mantle.
Let's go with 42 blast.
We'll stick with that.
Well, I'm fine with that. His name is Chris B. Brown. You can find him and all of his fine work out on smartfootball.com. Chris, this was incredible. Dan, is that the right way to characterize?
Illuminating.
This was tremendous. Thank you so much for all your time.
Oh, trust me, my pleasure. And also, when you guys get critiques and corrections, feel free to pass them my way.
We will add all addendums to your inbox.
All right, Dan, again, that is Chris B. Brown from smartfootball.com. If you've listened to the program, you know that we've had Chris on the show over the years, again, to learn all about the X's and O's of college football.
Yep.
Today, though, his insight was particularly tasty, and so tasty that he very much earned the moniker Crispy Brown that we've given to him over the year. I am blown away by the complexity of all this. I am a nerd at heart, as I know you are as well. To hear the fact that they made up their own language, that they have to, that it requires them to make up their own language. That makes my heart smile, Dan. That makes me so happy that we do what we do, because it's just so damn nerdy. Yeah.
And isn't it kind of crazy that Chris is not a full-time football writer? He just writes books because he loves the stuff, and, wrote for Grantland, Espionage, all these places. It's so cool. And so the crispiness is the caramelization of knowledge, Ty.
Oh yeah.
The caramelization. No, it's all fascinating. I will not watch a football game, pro, college, high school, the same way. There will be now certain things I'll be looking for. And I'm going to be 100% honest, Ty. This has made me, and I was already excited to watch Nebraska football, but I'm actually now like, oh my, Nebraska's coming into the modern era. And they're going to be doing, this is going to be super fun. So even if Nebraska, year one, doesn't overwhelmingly impressed. Maybe it takes a year or two to get the quarterback situation situated. The Scott Frost stuff, Chip Kelly at UCLA should be very interesting to Bruins fans, Pac-12 fans. Auburn had a nice bounce back year in no small part because of the offense getting back to where it should be. And, Clemson obviously hasn't missed a step running tempo stuff, but it's all super fascinating to me. And God, now I'm going to watch every TCU game to see if those guys look down at their wristbands and if a blitz comes after. Woo!
I got to go load up Madden and see if these plays make any more sense now.
Okay.
In hindsight, knowing the terminology, knowing at least a little bit about the convention of the language of football.
Mm-hmm.
Very insightful. We appreciate Chris's time.
Always.
Spent like an hour with us talking about all things football communication. So, Scheme Theme Month rolls on. Again, presented by our good friends over at Oliver's Apparel. Oliver'sApparel.com. Use the code SOLID. They'll knock 15% off your order.
It's getting sunny out, Ty. You got to prepare. You're going to be outdoors more.
Got to prepare. We've got more Scheme Theme Month content ahead. But for the interim, Dan, I need to go and catch my breath.
Do it.
I need to get some food and recharge for another great show that we've got planned a week from now, okay?
Listen, I'm right there with you. I got to sit down. I got to take a breather here. I don't want to pull a hammy getting so excited about these X's and O's.
For that guy over there, his name is Dan Rubenstein. And of course, for our guest of honor, Chris B. Brown from smartfootball.com. My name is Ty Hildebrand. We'll catch you all in a week. In the meantime, stay solid.
Peace.
Today's show was brought to you again by our good friends over at Oliver's Apparel. Use the offer code SOLID for 15% off your order. Also, today's show brought to you in part by our good friends over at Proper Cloth, the leader in men's shirts. If you need new clothes for any of your holiday festivities, go to propercloth.com, where ordering a custom shirt has never been easier. Create your custom shirt size by answering 10 easy questions. Shirts start at just $80 and are delivered in just 2 weeks. For premium quality, perfect fitting shirts, visit propercloth.com. Use the gift code SOLID to get $20 off your very first custom shirt.